You didn't just get it over the line, you blew the doors off.
Sir Keir Starmer basking in victory on the North Kent coast, where Labour snatched Medway Council from the Conservatives. There were also Labour victories in areas like Stoke-on-Trent, the party lost control of 8 years ago, and in the weather vane marginal of Swindon. Some disappointed Tories said the fault lay with Boris Johnson's leadership and the brief premiership of Liz Truss.
If you're going to swap Prime Minister 2 or 3 times, the electorate don't like it, they don't understand it, and they generally go out to punish parties that do that. So, yeah, I think that's probably the main reason for it.
I'm not detecting any massive groundswell of movement towards the Labour Party or excitement for their agenda. What people want us to do is focus on their priorities: halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing debt, cutting waiting lists and stopping the boats. Those are the country's priorities, those are this government's priorities, and that's what we're going to deliver.
I don't actually think it's a good idea, though. I should have thought.
Rishi Sunak spent much of the rest of his day meeting heads of government, attending the coronation tomorrow. Many of his councillors had no such distractions as they watched seats fall to Labour and to the Liberal Democrats, who've gained 8 councils so far, mainly in traditional Tory territory, including Windsor and Maidenhead.
I think it's time we started the countdown to the next general election. Are you ready?
Yes!
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yay!
The Liberal Democrats' Bird of Liberty mascot failed to pop out of the clock, but nothing could puncture Ed Davies' big day.
Fantastic! I'm so proud that when Katy Perry and Lionel Richie enter Windsor Castle for the coronation concert on Sunday, they'll be going into a ward that's represented by 3 brand new Liberal Democrat councillors.
But does a bad night for the Tories amount to a disaster? Is general election defeat now nailed on? Here's the Tory and Labour share of the vote in local elections a year or so before some recent general elections. Small Labour leads over the Tories, which disappeared the next year when the Tories won the general election. Labour was 16 points ahead of the Tories in the local elections in 1996, just before Tony Blair's Labour landslide. Labour's lead over the Tories in yesterday's election is projected to be 9%. Some think it could even be lower. Not all analysts agree with Keir Starmer's interpretation of the numbers.
Make no mistake, we are on course for a Labour majority at the next general election.
Some Tory MPs said they detected voters' priority was to get them out, and they'd vote tactically to achieve that. Rishi Sunak will want to head off that tendency after a night that saw the Tories lose seats to Labour, the Lib Dems and the Green Party.
People are putting the trust in the Green Party, whether that's in Worcester, where we topped the poll, South Tyneside, where we increased our numbers, whether it's in Southend, in Havant, in Lincolnshire, where we've won seats for the first time.
The Greens have now won outright control of an English council for the first time in mid-Suffolk. In many wards, they were the only anti-Conservative choice. Tories need their opponents to be splitting the anti-Conservative vote, and there are signs this isn't always happening. The imminence of the coronation looks like it's muted for now some of Rishi Sunak's Tory critics. But some will find their voice the other side of the festivities as the party debates how it can turn round these grim results.
And Gary is with me now.
You were talking at the beginning of the programme about how the Tories had said they might hit 1,000 councillor losses. They weren't sharing that with us, as you hinted, in the interests of candour. This was expectation management. They really didn't think they'd be in this bad a place. Labour hoped that they might be in a comfortable double-point percentage share of the vote lead over the Tories. They're not in that place. And the consequence of this is that the whole issue of how does a minority government operate and who props it up comes back onto the agenda, exactly where Keir Starmer in particular doesn't want it. That's why you heard him in that report proclaiming with absolute certainty that Labour would now have a majority. He's not at all certain of that. and you can expect to see Rishi Sunak bringing the debate back on to, well, who would prop up a Keir Starmer government. Lots of other things are emerging from the data here. It looks like the great realignment of politics that we spotted after Brexit, when Brexit voting, traditionally Labour voters went over to the Tory party. It's not unwound, but there are signs of it unwinding a bit. And I think another thing you can say, looking at the numbers today, is that the whole idea, Ed Davies raising it when he was wandering around earlier, that we might have an early general election. I wouldn't put your money on that. They'll go late with these sorts of numbers.
And is there any reason for Rishi Sunak to have cheer?
Well, it's only a few weeks since Tory MPs were going around saying after these May elections they'd actually depose him in a coup. I mean, it's a small glimmer of light, but he's not actually going to suffer a coup. But he's definitely going to suffer an awful lot of Tory MPs turning around saying you're not taking us in the right direction. We need tax cuts. We need to come out of the European Convention of Human Rights. That sort of agenda.
Thanks, Gary. Well, we've been out and about in Derbyshire, where a swathe of councils were up for grabs, and the results have echoed the picture across the country, one of Labour gains and Tory losses. Our senior political correspondent, Paul McNamara, has been speaking to some of the winners and losers in Erewash, which Labour has taken for the first time in 20 years.
By the time the Erewash count had even began this morning, political tides had shifted overnight, and poker faces were in short supply.
So it's early doors at the moment, but how are you feeling?
Confident.
How does this election feel to the last couple?
I'm not going to jinx it, but it looks good. It looks good for the Labour Party.
How does that feel after the last couple of elections?
Fabulous. Fabulous.
How are you feeling?
Slightly nervous, yeah. I must say, when I've been walking around knocking on doors, they got a lot of sort of like, if you wear your rosette, they're sort of like open, shut the door straight away on you. Think you just don't have to take it personally.
But by mid-morning, a borough council Tory for 20 years was beginning to turn red.
But Linda Burrs, you're the first winner of the day.
I know.
How's that feel?
It feels amazing. It's incredible.
But for every Labour win...
So how long have you been a councillor for?
12 years.
OK. And the result now?
It's very sad. It's very sad. And I just wish that I didn't have to finish my counselling career on a losing point, but things happen.
What were people saying to you out in the campaign trail? What were the possible hesitations for voting for you?
I think I shouldn't say this, but it's what's happening at Parliament. We're bearing the brunt of that, I'm afraid.
Is that what people are saying to you when you've been walking around?
Yes, yeah. It was, no, I'm not voting, you're not worth voting for, what the mess you're making of the country.
And as more seats were announced, Labour's lead increased further. An extra 9 councillors and now in charge.
I didn't really think it would be this bad, but I think that the feedback we've got from most people, and if you see even remarks now when people are seeing the results coming out, it's been fought on general election things, not local.
It's been a long election campaign. You've got a lot of volunteers who have worked very hard all the way through it.
Yep.
This hasn't been a great day for them. How do you feel now?
I say I'm just trying to give them a hug, and if you talk to me now, I should fill up because, yeah, I'm upset. Sorry. You said volunteers, they've really worked their socks off, and it's a nasty slap in the face. But, they're there and they're coming back. We'll come back. Sorry.
So after 2 decades in charge, in this compact corner of Derbyshire at least, it's time for the Tories to pack up and plan for life in opposition.
So it's a slightly different story here in Derby City. They're just packing up behind us now. About half an hour ago, we got the full results. So Labour have picked up 8 councillors. They're now on 23. Conservatives are down at 15. And what we've got here is no overall control, but Labour are the biggest party. The curiosity here, which we're not seeing really across the rest of the country is that the reason why Labour haven't done quite so well here is because of the Reform Party. This is the party that was the phoenix from the flames of the Brexit Party, Nigel Farage's last go at politics. And they actually have a strong presence here. They've picked up an extra councillor here. So the Reform Party are now on 6. That's a bit of a blow to Labour. They've eaten into Labour's chances of taking the whole council. And that is a concern among a few red wall seats. Talking to a few red wall MPs over the last year, the one thing they keep coming back to is, do you know what? If the Reform have a strong presence, we might be in trouble. We've seen a resurgence here. A lot of people across the red wall are going to be worried now.
Paul McNamara, thank you. Well, the Electoral Commission has admitted there have been some challenges with its new voter ID requirement after some people complained that they'd been turned away from polling stations. Critics say the new rules should be scrapped. Our political reporter Serena Barker-Singh joins me now. Serena.
Well, this was the first big test of the Tories' fairly controversial voter ID laws. And what we saw were people turning up to the polling stations that didn't know about the new requirement. One nurse tried to use her NHS pass, but that wasn't on the list of accepted forms of identification, so she wasn't allowed to vote. One woman told me that her maiden name was on the electoral roll, but on her ID was her married name, so she, even though she brought photo identification, was also turned away. Now, Unlock Democracy is a campaign group. They say at least 5,000 people might have been affected, but we won't really know about how many people were turned away until the Electoral Commission has their report. The government has theirs in November. But what's interesting is today Number 10 didn't rule out the possibility that they were looking into accepting wider forms of photo identification in a general election. Now, they also say that they're doing this because it strengthens democracy and it stops in-person voter fraud. But it's worth noting that the Electoral Commission themselves say that there's been no evidence for wide-scale electoral fraud in the last 5 years.
So do we know how these changes would affect a general election?
We don't know, but we've got a sense today from electoral administrators. Now, they're the people in polling booths who run election. There's thousands of them. And they said today, while there was no mass disruptions, which is something that they were worried about, on the other hand, 2 big cities, London and Birmingham, didn't have local elections today. And there may be issues that are specific to those cities that they won't know about yet. So if we're looking about this as a dry run for a general election, they're worried that there might be potential issues when the stakes are much, much higher next time round.
Serena Barker-Singh. Well, we are joined now by the Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Ed Davey, who's in Surbiton, and for the Conservatives, the Home Office Minister, Chris Philp. We also hope to be joined by a Labour spokesman in the next couple of minutes. But Chris Philp, let's begin with you, because what we've seen in these results is a lot of tactical voting, of people voting Liberal Democrat or Labour to get the Tory out. Why do you think the voters hate you so much at the moment?
Well, look, it's certainly been a disappointing set of results. There's no doubt about that. It hasn't been uniformly bad, of course. We won Torbay in Devon from the Lib Dems. Labour lost Slough and the Conservatives became the biggest party. And there were some gains for the Conservatives in places like Harlow and in Peterborough. So
it's a thin straw, though, isn't
it? Bad. But it was a disappointing set of results, no doubt about that. I think what is interesting is that Labour certainly aren't where they need to be to get the majority that Keir Starmer was claiming they would get earlier today. They're only about 8 or 9 points ahead of national vote share, about where Ed Miliband was in 2012. So they're at sort of Ed Miliband levels of performance, which is definitely not where they would want to be.
Well, it depends how you measure it. I think they'd say they're ahead of it. But I mean, you were a minister in Boris Johnson's government, and you were a very senior minister in Liz Truss's economic policy, and of course you now work for Rishi Sunak. So who do you think the voters are blaming the most? You know, is it Boris Johnson's law-breaking, Liz Truss's chaos, or Rishi Sunak's sort of out-of-touchness?
Well, there's a leading question. Look, I think governments across the Western world have been facing quite a few challenges. For example, with high food inflation, that's not unique to the UK. It's happening across the Western world. And I think the public expect us to meet those challenges. Rishi Sunak set out very clearly what his 5 priorities are: halving inflation, stopping the boats, growing the economy, cutting debt, and cutting hospital waiting lists. And I think what the public expect, well, hang on, I mean, he only announced them a couple of months ago, and I think what the public expect now from the Conservatives and from the government is to deliver on those 5 priorities, which I think do resonate. They're the right priorities, you know, halving inflation, growing the economy, cutting debt,
I don't know
cutting
why
waiting
you
lists.
think they're the right priorities when it hasn't worked. I mean, we've just heard that you now have lost over 1,000 seats. And yet, all day, we've seen Conservative ministers parroting those 5 pledges as if they are effective. They're clearly not.
Well, because they were only announced a very short time ago, and things like those, I've mentioned them twice, so I'm not going to test your patience by going through them again. But they're quite big things, which do take time in what have been across the Western world challenging circumstances post-COVID, the war in Ukraine, and everything else. So those do take time. But I think come the next general election, which is likely to be somewhere towards the back end of 2024, I don't know, but let's say it's sometime around then. By then, I'm expecting the government to have delivered, and I think the public will recognise and appreciate that, providing those 5 things get delivered.
All right, let's bring in Emily Thornberry, who's the Shadow Attorney General, who joins us from central London. Emily Thornberry, I mean, Chris Bolt points out that you've fallen short and that on the national projections, you wouldn't have a majority. Now, given the absolute chaos of the last year in Conservative politics, you must be a bit worried.
We're not a bit worried. We're really happy. Things have gone well. We have a mountain to climb. We have not pretended that we haven't. I mean, the Conservatives have got a whopping great majority from 2019, and it's very difficult to catch them up and overtake them. But you know what? We are. And we're in we've got a mountain to climb, so we're in a base camp, and actually this is a really good base camp, and we've got a fantastic view from here. We know which way we're going. Yes, of course it is.
Well, because, I mean, you know, the economic expectation is that inflation will come down. People are going to start seeing their pay rises, you know, not catching up, but they're going to get some pay rises. Things are going to be not as bad. Energy prices are going to expected to be coming down. So, you know, from the Conservatives' point of view, you know, things aren't going to be as bad in a year's time as they are now. That's going to be tough for you, isn't it? So if this is your high watermark, how are you going to win the next election with a majority?
This is not a high watermark. This is a path that we're on, you know, and we're getting there. And, you know, if we were on 10%, then we would show that we could get a majority. We were on 9%. But, you know, these sort of seat projections, anyway, have 70 independents in them. So, you know, they don't really work that well. And also, the seat projections on the basis of the results from last night don't include, you know, what's going on in Scotland, and frankly, it's quite difficult to predict exactly what's going to happen in Scotland because the Scottish nationalists are unravelling, and we've yet to see how it's going to play out. But you know, I really don't think that we have anything to not be happy about. And also, sorry, may I just make this point because it's quite important, which is where it is that we've been winning councils, because where we've been winning councils is where there are lots of marginal seats. We have been really careful in terms of where we have been targeting, and we have won these seats. And it's been and we've also been winning a whole lot of others that some of them of which were a bit of a surprise.
What we've seen, though, is a lot of tactical voting, isn't it? And people have voted Liberal Democrat where they felt that was the best way to get the Tory out, or they voted Labour where, you know, in places where you were
not if you look
the
at Brighton.
challenger. Well, we've seen quite a lot of it, though. Not always.
Not in Brighton, not in York. And so, I mean, there's quite a lot of places.
I'm not saying everywhere, but we have seen a lot of tactical voting, and I just wonder whether you worry about that come to a general election, because again, that could see a lot of Liberal Democrat wins in the south, which could again damage your chances of winning a majority and leave you, you know, in hock to Sir Ed Davey.
So three things. The first is that in a general election, people have a choice between a Labour government and a Conservative government, and the smaller parties just don't do as well in general elections as they do in local elections. I kind of think, you know, that's actually kind of quite an important point. And And as for being in hock to anybody, we're not going to be in hock to anybody. We're going to stand as Labour. We're going to ask people to give us the honour of serving them after the next general election. If we get a majority, then fine. If we don't, which I don't think we will, I think we're going to get a majority the way that we're going. But if we end up with a minority government, then we'll just say to the smaller parties, are you going to vote for our King's Speech? Are you going to vote for our budget? Because if you're not, you'll have to face your constituents and explain to them why not. Because if you're representing them properly, then you will need to support what it is that we're doing. We're not doing any deals. I mean, we don't need to.
Ask him.
And I suspect we won't end up doing so. I suspect that we will end up with a majority government, and that will be a stupendous result.
Let's see. Let's ask Ed Davey, who joins us now from Surbiton. Well, what will you do when Labour challenge you to say, will you vote for their King's Speech? Will you have a price?
Come on, I'm focused on our amazing results last night. It's one of the best results we've ever had. I'm seeing us go over 400 gains across the country. My count, it's 12 councils we've taken control. And, after the Cheshire and Amersham by-election, which no one expected us to win in true blue Buckinghamshire, I talked about the blue wall in the south of England and beyond, where it was the Liberal Democrats challenging the Conservatives. And what I can tell you, since that Cheshire and Amersham by-election, we've not only just won 2 other by-elections, but we had the best results of any party in terms of gains at the last set of local elections, and we've had fantastic gains this time. We are taking the Tories on in places like Surrey, in Sussex, in Oxfordshire, in Hertfordshire and beyond. And I'm very excited about the prospects of Liberal Democrat MPs in numbers at the next election.
But I mean, you'll also have to account for some of your campaigning in the local elections when it comes to the general election. And young people, particularly, who can't afford homes at the moment, might say, well, look at what the Lib Dems were doing. There was a load of sort of NIMBYism about house building and not in our backyard when young people want new homes.
I'm afraid that's Conservative line. The truth is Liberal Democrat councils are actually building lots of houses. We do differ from the Conservatives in this regard. The Conservatives want a developer-led approach where they don't necessarily get the right houses in the right places. Liberal Democrats want a community-led approach. And when that is applied, we see more affordable housing, more council housing, for example, and we see the infrastructure to build real communities. My wife's a councillor here in Kingston. She's got the housing portfolio. She's building more council homes than we have for a generation. And I think that community-led approach, where you meet the needs of young people and families who are struggling at the moment, I think that's the right thing. People want to do that. With the cost of living crisis, with high energy bills and high food bills, we're seeing high rents, we're seeing mortgages go up, and the Liberal Democrats have been campaigning on this, putting forward alternative ideas, alternative economic policies, and that's really had a really great response from people in the areas we've been campaigning hard in, alongside our NHS policies and our policies on the environment.
Well, Sir Ed Davey, thank you very much for joining us. Well, joining me now here on the Green is Aisha Hazarika, broadcaster, columnist and former advisor to Ed Miliband and Harriet Harman. And from New York, James Johnson, who was pollster to Theresa May before co-founding the political research company JL Partners. James Johnson, first of all, I mean, do you think, looking at these results, it's recoverable for the Conservatives?
I think it is. I think earlier in the morning, overnight, it looked like this was a very good night for Labour. But the most recent national equivalent vote share forecast that's come out, that shows Labour only 7 points ahead of the Conservatives, that suggests that Labour are not performing as well as the national polls suggest. If you'd have said to people a couple of months ago, in the midst of double-digit polling leads that we've seen after the Liz Truss debacle and very high inflation, that Labour would only put a point on their 2022 performance and would be performing as well as Ed Miliband did in 2012, I think Labour will be very disappointed with that. There's no doubt the Conservatives have taken a hit at these local elections. That's very, very clear. But we are really not seeing Labour capitalising.
Aisha?
Well, I mean, it wouldn't surprise you that I would push back on that. I mean, I think Labour's had a pretty good night in terms of how it's done across the country. I mean, of course, Labour cannot be complacent. It has such a mountain to climb. Even if Keir Starmer gets the same swing as Tony Blair did in 1997, he only gets a working majority of just one. But I think if you look at the journey that the Labour Party has been from getting absolutely spanked, quite frankly, the 2019 general election campaign, to now being competitive and having a really good chance of forming the next government. And when you look at how the Conservatives have done, just let me finish this point, the fact that they were briefing out expectation management of 1,000 losses as a kind of jokey, and now it's turned into like a self-fulfilling prophecy. To have done worse now than Theresa May did in 2019 is a really bad situation.
Within Labour, you know, Labour's been having this sort of row with the left about, you know, Starmer's not capturing the public mood, he's not sealing the deal. Does this put that argument to bed?
I think it does. I think most people in the Labour movement now accept that Keir Starmer has done a pretty good job. Last night's results sort of show that. I think
pretty good's not good enough, though, is it?
Well, let's see when we get to the next general election. But I think if you had said to the Labour Party, you know, a couple of years ago that we'd be in this position now, they would happily sort of take it. And also, it's kind of proving his strategy is working. They're crucially winning back those seats in the Red Wall. And if they pick up significant seats in Scotland, which is very... Remember, these elections don't cover Scotland. You could be looking at a very, very big shift in British politics.
James Johnson, tactically for the Conservatives, you know, what we're seeing is this big push for economic competence to take the drama out of politics in a way. But at the same time, they're still fighting on culture war issues, on immigration. Do these two strategies sit comfortably together?
Well, I think that's certainly what the Conservatives think. And when you do focus groups, when you talk to swing voters, undecided voters across the country, they're very worried about the cost of living. They're worried about inflation. But they're also very concerned about levels of illegal immigration and people crossing the channel. So, you know, in terms of the top issues that people are concerned by, especially those Conservative 2019 voters, cost of living, the economy and immigration alongside the NHS are some of those key priorities. I think Aisha's absolutely right about Scotland. That is the big unknown. We obviously didn't have Scottish local elections today, but you know, that clearly could cause an upset. But there's absolutely no doubt that if you're the Conservatives looking at this, you would have felt very squeamish about 10 hours ago. Now you're looking and thinking, oh, actually, the next election really is up for grabs.
I'm sorry. I've got to come on back on that. A lot of respect for James, but that is absolute pie in the sky. Tory MPs are absolutely bricking it right now, particularly not just because of Labour, but because of the Lib Dems as well. And for all the stuff of the culture wars, all the stuff on small boats has delivered very small votes for the Conservative.
Just briefly, James, you know, is it actually Rishi Sunak who hasn't sealed the deal here? And that the Labour attacks on him have worked, haven't they? That he's out of touch?
Oh, there's absolutely no doubt that amongst those voters who've switched from the Conservatives to Labour, there are concerns about Rishi Sunak's wealth. That's one of the biggest hesitations we see about him. But there's absolutely no doubt that Rishi Sunak, if these elections had taken place 6 months ago under Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, the Conservative Party would have done significantly worse. But look, I mean, this is, you know, I'm just looking at the numbers here, and when political parties are in opposition, it's not a case that it's not okay to be on the way or going up the mountain or, you know, making steady progress. Political parties in opposition tend to need a double-digit point lead to win government in these local elections. Labour's on 7, and that's really not significant enough.
This level of loss is not going to help. The Rishi revival is dead.
We must leave it there. Aisha Hazarika, James Johnson, thank you both very much.